On October 27, 2020, a young man named Walter Wallace Jr. was shot 14 times by two Philadelphia police officers. He was 27 years old and a father to 8 children that struggled with mental illness. The family had called that day 911 3 times to request help for Walter. Police were first to arrive. Not only had they been aware of Walter's mental illnesses, but his wife had also told the officers that her husband was bipolar. When police arrived, Wallace Jr. was outside of his home with a knife in hand. The first thing officers did, as well as tell Walter to drop the knife, was draw their guns. Kathy Wallace, Walter's mother, was now shielding her son from the police. As Walter stepped towards the officers, he was then shot a total of 14 times. Law enforcement officers should not be first at the scene of a mental health crisis. The Treatment Advocacy Center states that adults with mental illnesses are involved in every 1 in 4 fatal police shootings. Most often than not, mental illness is a silent battle being fought. Although you cannot see mental illness like a broken bone, it does not make it any less real. Justice teams found that across the U.S., when people are in a mental health crisis, police are usually the first ones called. Only a very small percentage of calls, about 4%, concerning mental health emergencies result in EMS responding without police. The harsh reality that we face today is that police officers have become the first people on the scene in a mental health call. They have not been appropriately qualified in a behavioral crisis to be first on the scene. As a result, this increases the risk of fatalities because of an altercation that officers are not prepared to face. Having mental health issues or being suicidal or having a substance abuse is not a crime. We need to stop criminalizing mental health issues. The problem with police officers being first at the scene of a mental health crime increases the risk of an altercation which results in a tragic outcome. Once we address this problem, we can apply the solution of having a mental health professional become the first responder for a person who is in a crisis with a mental health issue. With this solution, we are saving the psychological and physical safety of those put in danger by insufficiently trained officers. Most people cannot identify a problem with officers coming to a mental health crisis scene, but there are many problems. The National Institute of Mental Health states that about 1 in 5 adults in the United States have a mental illness. That is projected to be about 51.5 million people. Furthermore, a quarter of the police calls involve a person with a mental illness. A mental illness is defined by the National Alliance of Mental Illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, behavior, or mood. These conditions profoundly impact day-to-day living, and they may also affect the ability to relate to others. If you have or you think you might have a mental illness, the first thing you must know is that you are not alone. Only a tiny percent of the time do EMTs respond without police. This is problematic because police are not trained to deal with a person who is not in their right mind. Many do not even want to engage with the person. An armed officer responding to a crisis as such can be very triggering. Police have been taught to react with force first. While police training helps, regular patrol officers rarely receive more than a very basic training and still often resort to force rather than more appropriate approaches. This was stated by Brookings University. This ends up escalating the situation rapidly and far too often end with deadly results. Anywhere from 50 to 70% of people are killed every year, and they have a mental illness. Once we identify the problem with officers arriving as the first responders, we can set our plan into action. When we change out officers as first responders for mental health professionals, most of our problems we had immediately go away. I plan to have mental health professionals certified with the kinds of situations they will face. This plan will be government enacted. In every state, MHPs will be the first on the scene of a mental illness case. Situations such as depression disorders, anxiety disorders, addiction, bipolar disorders, suicide disorders, and many more. They will be trained to diffuse the problem and then come to a solution, as these people will not take any violent actions if not necessary. Along with MHPs, the EMTs will also be on the scene just if anything or anyone is harmed. The benefits to my solutions can increase many individuals' lives that would automatically be hurt if an officer was first on the scene. Mental health professionals can provide these people with the proper treatments to become better and start striving in their lives. Some may say that if the situation is violent and officers aren't there, what's going to happen? I understand where the concern is, but if the MHP is unable to solve the problem in her way that she was trained, a mental health professional should then call an officer. But officers should be prepared to use force such as a taser before anything leads to a gun, which that can escalate how the person feels at that moment. By putting this solution in place, we are saving lives at the end of it all. When I think of a life where MHPs are first on the scene of a mental health crisis instead of an officer, think about a life you just saved. Think of this if you have a bipolar disorder, which is a mental illness like a mood swing but 100 times worse. You immediately get into an overly angrily mood and lash out at your family. This then prompts them to call 911. Since the new law came into place, the 911 operator dispatched the MHPs and the EMTs to the situation. As they arrive on the scene, you get aggravated and grab a knife. But with the MHP trained in these kinds of cases, she can calm you down and get you to drop the knife. She then develops a treatment plan to help you maintain your bipolar disorder. With the MHP first on the scene, we saved another person. This could have turned into a situation such as Walter Wallace's if it was dealt with by an officer. With these reasons, law enforcement officers should not be first to the scene of a mental health crisis. With the plan of having a mental health professional on the call scene first, we will save many lives that could have been lost. Just think if Walter had encountered an MHP with the experience of how he felt before the police arrived, he would still be here today and still be living a long and happy life with his 8 children. But he isn't, because law enforcement officers were first on the scene that day.